step forward.
All right, guys, welcome back. Then in our podcast. This is, I guess, the second attempt at the format here as far as kind of giving free speech on a topic that we find interesting as creatives. This time, we're going to be getting into dialogue and I guess just any creative medium, whether it be film, animation, games, etc. Or do you have a focus that you want to put on specifically, Ethan?
No, I mean, I think what initially sparked this conversation between us was talk about movies. And gotcha. I think it was, you were more or less talking about how the dialogue in like Star Wars Episode 4 and Jurassic Park, you mentioned how those movies did not have good dialogue. And I was like, hold up. I know Star Wars is a bit rough on the dialogue, but I feel like with Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, they found a way to make it engaging. And I pushed back hard against Jurassic Park because I said that actually is good dialogue. And I think you were saying dialogue, that stuff from like, obviously in Django or Tarantino's, that's what you consider more actually good, quote unquote, dialogue.
Star Wars for sure, not necessarily Jurassic Park in totality. I think I more so thought a lot of things in Jurassic Park were kind of dated in a sense, but obviously that makes sense with a lot of the references and things you'd have in a dialogue back then won't really transfer over too well. At least for something like that, I think that's meant to be a money grabbing, like kind of eye popper thing. I don't think there is really much depth as far as like development of things that were kind of focused in that movie originally. I could be wrong. Star Wars for sure. Not even just me, like again, like Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher, like the stars themselves all commented on how bad the dialogue was. I think Harrison Ford famously wanted to try to make George Lucas read his own script because he hated the dialogue. Like he did not saying what he had to say.
The line was, he said, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it. Either you can write this shit or you can write this stuff, but you can't say it. That's what Harrison Ford said to him, to his face.
Right.
Yeah. So I think one thing real quick before we get too much deeper into this is just to, in your own words, on opinion, on trimmed beard, what do you consider to be good dialogue?
So I think it depends. Obviously, this varies because I don't think the same type of dialogue is needed for every kind of medium. If I'm making a movie that's more happy-go-lucky or like a Transformers-esque type of action movie, I don't like, you can have deep dialogue, it'll be appreciated, but I don't think it really fits all the scenarios. Like if I'm having a really high intense action scene that's action-packed, I'm not going to be expecting really introspective dialogue for that because it just doesn't serve that purpose. It doesn't serve that purpose for me personally. I think there's scenes, like just environments for that. But in regards to a movie like a really in-depth movie, like for Django, back in better terms, like any kind of slave movie, anything that's meant to be emotional in a sense, that's really character oriented, I guess is the better thing, that where the characters really drive the dialogue forward. Dialogue there for me is meant to, first off, build your characters up. So build up quirks, personality traits, rather that be like catchphrases or little quirky things that they do, that you should have some form of individuality when you're building up those characters in dialogue, as well as building up relationships. I should be introduced to this character and who this character is, and this character's relationship in relation to other people, the scenario, the environments they're in, or the scenario or the actions that they're partaking in that moment in time. Mm-hmm. Those to me are like the first and foremost things you gotta have right out front to constitute good dialogue for me. Sure. If I'm watching a movie, I gotta know who they are and what's going on. Okay. Just have awareness. Like if I'm watching this movie, I need to know that the person who wrote this stuff is aware of what's going on and not just writing dialogue that can be universally, it's like generic lines, if you know what I mean. Like we've heard those lines that are very generic and that can be applicable to any scenario.
Mm-hmm. So I think, so there are some things there that you said in your definition that I completely agree with. And I think that in some sense, dialogue can be objective. You mentioned before, like, if it's a movie that's meant to be for kids or for, what they call a movie that you turn your brain off, dialogue doesn't have to be good, like Black Adam. And I would say false. I think that dialogue can always be good. It doesn't have to be the same, and it shouldn't be universally used in the same manner. But dialogue can always be good because, like you said, it can always reveal character, it can always move the plot, it can always be fun or engaging in some way. Some of the best Pixar movies have very little dialogue, but the dialogue it has, they work really well. WALL-E, there's almost no dialogue between WALL-E and Eve. However, the little bit of sparseness that when they mention this, they just say their names to each other, that works really well for them. You have other stuff where it's much more robust and overflowing, flowery and ornamental with Tarantino films, and that can be great. But sometimes also it gets a little long in the tooth. So it's a balance of actually having it. What words are needed to express what a character feels, and what words are needed to express what a character is, and also keeping the plot in mind and having it where it seems organic and natural. If you're doing a comedy like The Hangover, the dialogue should still be fun and make the characters that are on screen feel real. That's the point of it. So I would argue that it can be almost seem really dumb or inane, but if that fits what the character's going for, then it can be great.
Yeah, so, let me elaborate a little bit further. When I said it's not as much like I meant more so the complexity of the dialogue when it comes to like movies like a Black Adam or like a Pixar movie. I'm not expecting a Game of Thrones level, not even a level, just a Game of Thrones amount of dialogue. Like obviously things like that are dialogue driven. Like there are action things that go on there and actually other acting things, obviously, but that show relies to me 90% on the dialogue and what characters are saying and how they're saying it to make that show amazingly. Make that show amazing. With something like you alluded to with Wall-E in particular, that's probably the perfect way for me to think about that in regards to the two main characters don't really they say like one word, or I guess a 2-syllable word, or however you want to look at it. But it's more so the acting there, at least the animation there, and what the characters are doing that make that film so great. There are stints of like, I guess, minor dialogue exchanges and like longer form dialogue between the human beings on the planet or on the ship. But that majority of that movie, there's not a lot being said, but everything is progressing at the right pace. I think if you have Wall-E and Eve talking a lot, I think that kind of takes away from what that, again, that could just be that way that directors meant or the creator meant to do that in particular. But stuff like that, or something like a Cars movie that was also very dope and also had stints of trying to invoke emotion. It wasn't really heavily dialogue covered. Like they had stints where characters would have emotional exchanges, but they're more so like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Like there wasn't a lot of in-depth dialogue going on there. I just mean more of amount than the quality in that sense is what I meant by that.
So yeah, I feel you. And I think quality, it does play a role, obviously. That's a big thing. Sometimes you have shows like the West Wing. Not sure if you ever watched that one before, but West Wing by Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin is oftentimes regarded as one of the best dialogue writers or scenes writers out there. David Mamet, everything he did, of course, with multiple films with his. But the part of it too, though, if you go to like again Pixar with like Toy Story, the conversations between Buzz and Woody in a film, a quote unquote kids movie or family movie in 1995 when the movie came out, the conversations between Buzz and Woody felt extremely real. Also, it was on a micro level as far as between those two toys and those two male egos, but also on a macro level as far as a metaphor for existentialism. It all worked really well. So being able to do that, being able to walk that tightrope as a screenwriter, that's what I believe is good dialogue. Being able to have text and subtext, that's where the real skill shines. And a lot of people can't do that. There are plenty of films, like say for example, the Fast and Furious series. No offense, but that is a meathead central. It's like we're gonna drive. I mean, they don't even try to have like anything deeper at all. It's like we're gonna drive these cars. We're gonna shoot.
I'd say in the first couple, I think they tried that. At least with the first one.
Did they?
Yeah, there's stints of it. There's like it's like diamonds in the rough. They try at some point.
We're gonna bring up a quote. We're gonna actually take this time right now. Charlie's gonna find a quote from those first few films to prove me wrong. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I'm gonna hit up. I'll give Jeffrey a phone call because he's watched all those movies intimate. Like he's a huge Vin Diesel fan, or maybe not as much anymore. He'll claim he isn't anymore. But when we were growing up, he loved Vin Diesel in those movies to a huge extent. Sure.
And I'm not saying I'm definitely not saying Vin Diesel did a bad job in those movies. He's very, very big and large. But what I mean is, it's just like
No, I get your point. I get what you mean as far as the writing. Because it's not that.
No, but at the same time, like you mentioned, Game of Thrones or House of Dragons, right? Those or anything from West Wing or whatnot. Those types of programs, they do hinge on their repartee, the back and forth between characters and their dialogue, their verbal sparring matches, as they call. That's what they're supposed to be. Other movies, other series, horror films that we may love to pieces, they're not designed to be that way. So they're not going to have that kind of dialogue. You don't go there for that kind of stuff. The characters, it doesn't make sense for the characters in those worlds to talk that way. So it's a matter of like, in the context of this scene, in the context of this genre, would this character say this to this other character? If the answer is no, then don't do it to him.
I think where a lot of, especially I guess to kind of harp on horror in particular, I think a lot of the issue they do is they try to make those things that are really dialogue heavy, like a Game of Thrones. But in reality, I feel like they should be more focused on something like a Toy Story 3 to get it, for example. That movie, I guess, in that entire series, to me, the biggest emotional moment and the best moment of that show, or that series, is when the toys are on the conveyor belt in the garbage disposal
incinerator
landfill, and they don't say anything. You just look at the faces of the characters and you see they all come to their final, they do their final goodbyes and things like that without saying a single word. And that action alone and those eyes and that acting alone put so much emotion into everybody watching it. Grown men like you cried at it.
I did twice. I told you that. In confidence. Apparently, you never the spare over place. But yeah, but I did too.
I did too, though. We cried together. Well, maybe not together at the same time, but you never know.
That's it. Yeah.
But for the horror genre, again, you saw that in horror. Like with the reason I love the original Halloween movie so much. A lot of the encounters happened with nobody talking. Michael Myers himself doesn't talk. It's the subtle things he does, like when he put, I think the guy's name was Billy with the glass. He impaled him on the wall, like the subtle turning of his head to admire his art. Like it gives the character little things and character traits without him saying a single word, and it adds so much context to the situation without having to have a 15-page dialogue about, hey, I killed him and turned my head to the side because of this XYZ thing, or I do this because of this.
I couldn't agree more. And that does segue nicely into our next topic, which is, of course, when less is more. Right. That's a problem that young writers have a lot. I mean, I consult lots of young writers and whatnot. And the biggest problem people have is they don't know when to shut up. No offense. But it's like, you don't have to actually exposition dump everything. You don't have to have your characters, quote unquote, monologue like Syndrome and Incredibles 1, like everything they're doing. You can definitely, subtext goes a long way. Audiences are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. People can add 2 and 2 together and get 4 on their own oftentimes. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can let that play. Obviously, in horror movies or movies with the supernatural elements, it may be mad to have some kind of explanation there, but there's room for intrigue, there's room for mystery, but there's room to let people come to their own deductions, especially in visual mediums. We're talking about movies and TV and anime and video games. People are seeing these things on screen. Like you said, the biggest heartfelt moment that made us grown-ass men cry in Toy Story 3 was when the characters didn't say anything. They just held hands as they realized they're about to die. So yeah, sometimes the best dialogue is the best sentences are the ones not even said.
Right. Exactly. But I think a lot of that too comes from, at least for speaking from my own experience, I had a similar issue when I was initially starting to write. A lot of the examples you see and a lot of the things that people credit as like these amazing films or amazing pieces of artwork, it's the ones that are heavily dialogued, the ones with the long soliloquies and the long monologues that are world-renowned and people memorize by heart. So you see stuff like that and you want to imitate great art, so that's what you try to imitate. And that's just, to me, I just think the things that don't do that aren't praised enough. I don't think Toy Story 3 is probably praised a lot. I think that was praised enough, but other movies like that, like I don't think that factor is praised enough when it comes to creation or just creating in general.
Sure. No, I think one thing you're poking, you're kind of prodding in a way is our next topic, which is, of course, catchphrases or memorable dialogue, memorable lines, those kind of things. There are so many movies that for both of us growing up that have amazing, lines that everyone remembers over and over again. You quote Calvin Candy all the time from Django. What's the line? You had my attention, and now you have my how does it say it though? You had my
You had my attention, now you have my curiosity.
You have my curiosity, right? It's great. It's a fantastic line. Or even something as simple as Brad Pitt at the end of 7, what's in the box, that becomes, a household line. So, or I see dead people from Sixth Sense. It's bizarre. Oftentimes, you can't even predict what lines of dialogue will catch on, what things will be remembered the most about certain movies. There's several lines from Star Wars, a movie that you mentioned before, you talked about before, that doesn't necessarily have good dialogue, has countless memorable lines in it. So it's a great shot, kid. Don't get cocky. It's like that became a household line. So it's weird to think about what things permeate in our brains. I don't know.
I think a mistake to a lot of people make is that they try to force those lines. Like they see something like a Dark Knight and you see like, why it's so serious? Like he says it over and over again. Granted, that one I think more so worked because of the performance. So there's no guarantee, but I think that was kind of forced, even with the music was accompanying that, and it stopped when he said a certain thing. But I think everybody's trying to do that, where they're trying to make catchphrases or moments. They're trying to force those moments when I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing with like something like The Sixth Sense or those all those things we talked about before. I think the directors wrote those to have impact, but I don't think they wrote those lines with the intent of this being the thing that people remember from this movie. I'm just probably something else they intended to happen and be remembered, but it didn't, because you can't predict those kind of things.
Yeah, of course. And they, even sometimes when they try to set things up and you wouldn't think it worked out as well as it does. Like, for example, in the Chappelle Show, season 1, I think it was season 1, that's where Rick James shows up with with Charlie Murphy, with the whole idea of what the 5 fingers say to the face. He's like, huh? That, if you saw the behind the scenes on the DVD or whatnot, as far as like how what the line was originally supposed to be and how the way they kind of messed up a couple times with how it was finally eventually delivered, it became obviously a very famous thing. But it could have gone very differently. It was something they wanted to work, but they kind of had to finagle it to make it work even better on screen. So sometimes it is, like you said, they're trying to make it kind of catch on, or trying to capture lighting in a bottle. And sometimes it does work, and oftentimes it doesn't. You never know.
All right. Well, I think we're getting close to our limit now as far as the discussion. Again, this was a great discussion. Let us know if you guys enjoy this format. It's something that we wanted to do because it was, again, we love having these discussions through like a PlayStation party, and I feel like we don't get to have these conversations to the same extent on the live show, because we cover a lot of live news and things like that. If you guys enjoyed this, let us know. We appreciate your support. We hope for your continued support, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. Peach is crazy.